All this requires us to look at something very familiar from a different perspective. Most of us, if asked to picture a mountain, will imagine something like this. Mountains are triangular. Unless you're standing on top of the mountain, in which case mountains may look more circular. This point was made 1,000 years ago by the Chinese poet Su Dongpo, who recognized that the things that we're most familiar with, like the Chinese language, may look very different to other people. To the foreign language learner, Chinese appears to be not just one language, but two, which means that there is double the amount of information for them to learn. Secondly, spoken Chinese uses tones, which seem to make speaking unnecessarily complicated. And thirdly, written Chinese uses characters, which seem much more difficult to learn than an alphabet. This is why Chinese feels almost impossibly hard, and why the vast majority of foreigners who start give up. To help our students, both we and they need to look at the Chinese language from a different perspective. We can start by allowing our students to focus on one form of the language at a time, either the spoken or the written, because each has its own inherent logic and beauty. We all expect words in different languages to sound different, but most non-Chinese people do not expect intonation to change the fundamental meaning of a word. Even so, tones are not a difficult concept for non-Chinese people to understand, but they are incredibly difficult to assimilate because in other languages, our brains are trained to ignore tones. The first step for us as teachers is to appreciate this difficulty. The next step is to find ways to overcome it. Tones are actually designed to make spoken Chinese simpler, not more complicated. Compare these 4 words, for example. In English, the 4 words are of varying length and comprise 7 different syllables. In Chinese, the 4 words are all 1 syllable long and comprise just 2 different syllables. This simplicity is only possible because of tones. Memorization relies on our ability to make connections between pieces of information. Tones provide connections between otherwise unrelated words that make them easier to remember. Instead of presenting ba and ba separately because their meanings are unrelated, we could present them together because they sound similar. Learning them together makes it easier to remember both. We all expect words in different languages to be written differently too, but most non-Chinese people at least expect the writing to transcribe the spoken word so that if they know how to say something, they can write it. The fact that they cannot do that in Chinese seems absurd. Again, the first step for us as teachers is to appreciate this difficulty, and the next step is to find ways to overcome it. Characters are actually designed to enable us to do more with less. They were designed to represent what people are thinking rather than the sounds they are making when they speak. They're like emoji rather than an alphabet. Compare these words, for example. In English, the words use varying numbers of letters and have no meaning unless we sound them out and already know what the sound means. In Chinese, each word has a single character, which represents the meaning without needing to be sounded out. The sounds of the spoken words ren and da are no more related than the English equivalents person and big, but the visual connection between the characters makes both of them easier to remember. Likewise with ko and yen. Characters also allow us to help our students to discover rather than simply memorize new words through rote learning and repetition. For example, we can show our students that there is a character that comprises the character for person with the character for words, and then we can ask our students what they think it might mean. They might guess that it represents a message from someone, like a letter or a text, or it might represent a person who stands by their word, meaning trustworthy. If we affirm that, well then they might go on to guess that by extension it could mean to trust, or to believe, or, in the case of self-belief, confidence. This is logical and easy to recall without the learner having to write down a whole list of translations. But perhaps the greatest benefit of characters is that they do not change when you use them in different contexts. In English, you may have to add an ending like an S or ED, or change the spelling like turning sing to sang, or even entirely replace the word like replacing we with us. But in Chinese, you can simply rearrange the characters, and that means our students have less to learn and they can do more with it.